Hey there, nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back with another episode of Way of the Underhive. This series is dedicated to helping brand new players to Necromunda build their starting rosters and learn more about the game mechanics of their favorite gangs. And on today's episode, we will discuss playing an Ash Waste Nomad gang in the Aranthian Succession campaign setting. We will discuss the gang's strengths and their weaknesses, their fighters, their playstyle, and provide critical information that you can use in your future campaigns. So when we talk about the Ash Waste Nomads, all I have to do is ask you a series of questions. 1. Do you like a challenge in your game of Necromunda? 2. Do you want to fight the power of the Underhive and stand up for indigenous population rights? And 3. Do you enjoy the film and the novel Dune with its depiction of the Fremen? If that is the case, the Ash Waste Nomad gang might be for you. The Ash Waste Nomad gang is one of the most controversial gangs right now for Necromunda just because they play the game with a lot of handicaps. But even though they have a lot of obvious handicaps and not any obvious strengths, they are a gang of nuances, and if you learn how to play this gang correctly, you could absolutely destroy your opponents in your games of Necromunda. So that being said, let's go and talk about the positive and negatives of playing an Aranthian Succession campaign. So first of all, we're going to talk about the positive and negatives of playing in an Aranthian Succession campaign. So let's start with the positives. You have 2,000 credits that you can spend on your gang whenever you first create it, if you're staying in the Underhive. If you're planning on venturing out into the Ash Waste, you actually have 2,400 credits to play with, and that is what we're actually going to use for our list building for this video. We're going to assume the fact that you want to play both inside the Underhive as the Ash Waste, and so your starting roster will be at 2,400 credits. Now, unfortunately, many people look at that price increase of 2,400 credits for a gang that you can start with, and they get the negative attitude about it. A lot of people assume that what you want you to do is to actually spend twice as much money to purchase twice as many fighters to meet that core requirement of 2,400 credits. And actually, that's not the way you should actually look at it, all right? A lot of people think you should buy a 100,000 point gang and then double it, but they're wrong. In this situation, what you want to go for more is for quality rather than quantity of your fighters, and equip your fighters accordingly. So instead of just doubling the number of fighters that you would have in a starting gang, what you want to do is just stick with the normal amount that you'd always have when you first start a gang, like a box set, for example, would be perfect. But instead of just buying like really cheap weapons and really cheap equipment, actually equip them accordingly. Give them really good weapons, give them really good armor, give them war gear that you normally would not purchase at the beginning of a campaign, and spend your money on that, your point values on that in order to equip your gang. That way you can save a lot more money in an Aranthian Succession. So instead of having 20 fighters in your gang, you maybe just have maybe 8 fighters, but they're all fully equipped with everything they need to be successful in your games of Necromunda. And that's actually one of the cool positives of an Aranthian Succession, is that you can really build really powerful gangs and make them very elite. Now, let's go and talk about the negatives of an Aranthian Succession campaign. And first and foremost, it's going to be the balance bandwagon, especially if the people who are part of that balance bandwagon haven't received any upgrades yet. Unfortunately, Games Workshop just never releases everything all at once when it comes to these new campaign settings. It's kind of like a slow power creep. I guess it's a part of a marketing strategy. Personally, I feel it does a lot more harm than good, in my opinion, but whatever the situation may be, that's going to be a thing you got to worry about, because a lot of balance bandwagon people are going to complain about like how gangs become overpowered and you can exploit too many things, and if they're playing a game that hasn't received any upgrades yet, they're definitely going to complain about that. But as always, just ignore their complaints and tell them to put up or shut up or don't play the game. It's that simple. Now, like I said before, many people think that 1,000 point gang and doubling it is the way you go about making a gang for an Aranthian Succession campaign, but you don't need to do that. In fact, just start with a normal gang that you already have on hand and just fully equip them and make them as elite as you want them to be, so that way they can survive whatever the Underhive or the Ash Waste throws at them as well. At the same time, another negative about an Aranthian Succession campaign is that you may not be into narrative play. If you're not into narrative play, this may not be interesting to you. I'm just going to flat out say that right now. Aranthian Succession has a lot of narrative-based scenarios that usually use different gangs and very specific gangs to be in those narratives. So if you don't like playing narrative, this might not be an interest for you. But if you want to use the Aranthian Succession rules to build gangs for different campaigns, I highly suggest that. I think that'd be really cool as well. So now that we're done talking about the positive negatives of playing in an Aranthian Succession, let's go and talk about House Orlok and how it pertains in this new campaign setting. So with that being said, let's talk about the challenges of playing an Ash Waste Nomad gang. As I said before, they're one of the most controversial gang choices currently available right now for Necromunda players, and the reason why is because they're known as being one of the most challenging gangs to play in the game, right next up there with slave ogrins. Now there's a couple reasons why this is the case. First of all, Ash Waste Nomad gangs can make no alliances of any sort. They can't take any noble house alliances, at the same time they can't take any alliances with any of the guilds. Even the criminal factions won't ally them as well. So because of that, they do start off with a really huge handicap that other gangs don't. At the same time, when it comes to hired guns, they only have a very small amount of hired guns they can choose from to represent their gang. So because of that, that's another handicap they have. Plus, automatically they have an outlaw status on their gang, so if you're using a system where law-abiding and outlaw status are a huge aspect of the campaign, you are stuck in outlaw status and you can never get out of that outlaw status. Now, as of the time of this video is being made, there was nothing released yet for the Aranthian succession support for the Ash Waste Nomads, so they don't have any vehicles or crews or anything new by the time this video was actually made. So because of that, that's going to be another problem that you're going to face as an Ash Waste Nomad gang. And not to mention, probably the biggest challenge of all, especially if we're talking about the Aranthian succession as well as the Ash Waste, they have no vehicles or equivalent to a vehicle type thing game mechanic for the Ash Waste Nomads. So these are all challenges that you have to face as a player if you decide to take on the Ash Waste as a player. Now with that being said, it's not all doom and gloom for playing an Ash Waste Nomad gang. And the reason why I feel that is the case is because the Ash Waste Nomad is a gang of nuances. It's very, very subtle. Not only is it very subtle in its game mechanics and the lore for them as well, that's where their strength really lies in, because nothing in an Ash Waste Nomad gang is very obvious. When you look at the stats of the fighters that make an Ash Waste Nomad gang, when you look at the skills that they have access to, the stats and the skills really don't seem very obvious where a really strong game mechanic can be found. When you look at the equipment that they take and the different options they have to get those equipment and the different fighter types, there doesn't really seem to be a really obvious good combination to look at it. That's because this gang is very subtle in the way you have to approach playing this gang. You got to know basically what kind of weapons and equipment to purchase for your gang and what it can and can't do, and keep that in mind when you come with your overall strategy. At the same time, you got to also look at the roles that your fighters will be playing in your gang as well, because the role that they play is actually not really all that obvious on the surface, so it's kind of hard to dig into. But once you look at the right fighters, the right stats and skills, and combine, more importantly, the proper weapons and war gear, then it becomes very powerful for your gang as well. Another thing that's interesting about the Ash Waste Nomad gang is that of all the gangs that are currently available, their credit cost and for their weapons and equipment and their fighters is quite high. And the things that an Ash Waste Nomad gang has to do is very risky because they don't really excel in any one thing and they have a lot of handicaps going for them. So we take that combination of high cost of their fighters and that aspect of high risk, it may seem like a losing game for you, a zero-sum game, but when you look at it and you actually equip your guys correctly, it actually ends up being a highly rewarding gang, a very powerful gang as well. And once you maximize the strengths of your gang and basically minimize your weaknesses, you could actually just steamroll over your opponents and cause all kinds of harm to them. Alright, so for example, some of these nuances I'm talking about, especially when we're talking about Ash Waste Nomads, are things like the Stormcaller, for example. On the surface, the Stormcaller, it seems like a very powerful close combat fighter. After all, that fighter is mounted on a Dustback Helmite, so he's made for moving around and attacking. At least that's the idea that you get from it. At the same time, the weapons they use for his close combat for Stormcaller staff seems like a really powerful close combat attack weapon. But actuality, if you really send the Stormcaller into combat, you're not actually using that fighter what they're intended for. As weird as it may sound and as counterintuitive as it may sound, you actually don't commit the Stormcaller at all if you want to be successful at your Ash Waste Nomad game. You actually keep the Stormcaller in a camping type position as if you would if you're playing Call of Duty, for example, or first-person shooting game. You put the Stormcaller in a covered position where you really can't be they really can't be easily accessible to, where they can't be shot at or assaulted too easily, and you keep them in the same spot the entire time of the game, and all you're really doing is using their abilities for their second abilities to control battlefield conditions to its maximum effect. When you do that, that's going to give you a huge edge in combat on the tabletop, and that's where you're going to be able to destroy an enemy as well. Another really big complaint about Ash Waste Nomads is that they don't have access to high strength weapons right at the start of the campaign. When you look at their starting rosters and the equipment that's available to them, the weapon seems to be kind of like middle strength at best, and so because of that, when you're going against gangs of vehicles, it could prove very difficult on the surface anyways of you actually engaging those enemies. And the reason why that is the case is because the thing that's going to set the Ash Waste Nomad gangs apart from other gangs is that they have to really rely on the shock ability for their weapons. Almost all their weapons have the shock ability, which means that if you roll a 6 to hit, you automatically wound the enemy, regardless of the toughness and strength characteristic. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, that's only a 1/6 chance of actually getting anything done. But when you look at the number of shock weapons that Ash Waste Nomad gang has access to, and you're concentrating that fire on vehicles, for example, the ability to get off those wounds and gain those sixes to have that shock ability to trigger and cut right through your enemy's armor and its toughness of his vehicles, very, very powerful. Because when you roll that damage dice to the vehicle, if you get anything besides like a critical hit or something like that, or a penetrating hit, it can really screw up your enemy's game plan. It can really mess them up really easily for their vehicles. So even though on the surface shock doesn't seem all that powerful, when you look at the volume of fire that you're using from those shock weapons onto your enemy, it's really good to help you out to take out those vehicles, even though you may not have anything accessible like a mining laser or melt-a-bombs or things of that nature. Now, another thing that's also really impressive about the Ash Waste Nomad gang is the hidden condition rules for the Ash Waste Nomads. A lot of the Ash Waste Nomads have what's called a Sky Mantle, and a Sky Mantle allows them to take the double action, which allows them to hide in the wasteland, and they become hidden. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because when you actually look at the rule as written for the hidden condition, it kind of creates an interesting situation for your Ash Waste Nomads and makes them extremely survivable. So what we're going to do real quick, we're going to take a look at my desktop, and we're going to actually pull up that rule and discuss it in detail. Alright, so here we are on my desktop computer real quick, and I'm going to pull up the Necromunda comprehensive rules real fast. So let's go and drag that PDF right here. So here we go. Now, this is the thing I was talking about when it comes to the hidden condition for the Ash Waste Nomads, because technically speaking, this could be a really powerful ability, especially when you compare it with that Sky Mantles that almost every single member of the gang has, and let's go ahead and talk about that. So this is the actual only illusion that it makes towards the hidden condition in the Necromunda rule set. And basically this is what it has to say here. It says, range attacks may not be made against targets more than 3 inches away unless the target has replaced the hidden condition with the blaze condition or revealed condition, see below, or is wearing a refractor field. Now, fighters with photo goggles or infrascopes extend this range to 12 inches. In addition, models may not make a charge double action against enemies who they cannot see. For example, their target must be within 3 inches or have a blaze or a revealed marker on them or be wearing a refractor field. Now, what does that basically mean? It means if you decide to take that hidden condition for your gang and use that hidden condition as well, it means that your enemy cannot target any of your fighters as long as they have that hidden condition going on. And at the same time, so long as your shooting attack don't have any blaze conditions attached to them, or if you're not wearing any refractor fields, they can't spot you back in return. Now, you might be thinking, well, Commander Cheapskate, if I shoot at my opponent, they're going to be able to find me because the weapons are going to be loud and they're going to be able to detect that as well. Normally, you would be correct on that one, but because you can also purchase gun shrouds, which makes your weapon silent for your gang, you combine those two aspects to your weapon, your opponent is never going to be able to find you, which means you can engage your enemy at distance, shoot at them the entire time. They cannot return fire back to you because they can't find you. Now, if they happen to be within range using these infrascopes or photo goggles, then of course, they could try to spot you, but for the most part though, they can't be engaged. Now, this is where things get really cool with an Ash Waste Nomad gang. You also have the Stormcaller, and the Stormcaller can also reduce the visibility of the battlefield conditions of your battle. So because if you really want to mess with your opponent, you could just actually darken the availability and limit the vision of your enemies even further to the point where they can't do these kind of things. Equip your fighters, however, with photo goggles and infrascopes, and since most gangs won't do that from the start, you can start engaging those enemies almost in pure darkness type situations and cause all kinds of problems. Now, let's continue on with the hidden rule. It says here, if any fighter subject to the hidden condition makes a range attack, with the exception of weapons that have the silent weapon trait, or makes a close combat attack using a weapon with the power trait, remove from them the hidden condition and replace it with the revealed condition. Now, here's a nice thing about this part. So we already talked about using the silent weapon trait for your weapons by putting gun shrouds on all your basic weapons. Those gun shrouds are going to make it very difficult for your opponent to find you, so that's not going to take away your hidden condition. And if you look at the close combat attacks, it says the power trait. The Ash Waste Nomads do not have any weapons, close combat weapons anyway, with the power trait on it. So that means they never lose their hidden condition when they make close combat attacks, which makes them extremely dangerous in this part. Now, here's the kicker about the rule about the hidden condition. It says, in the end phase of each turn, revealed fighters become hidden once more unless they're also subject to the blaze condition. So what does that basically mean? It means that your fighters are hidden again unless they're of course on fire, and if they're not on fire or using refractor field, they can't be found with. Now here's the thing that begs the question. The question begins with this. If you engage someone in close combat, right? Let's say you attack somebody in close combat from in your hidden condition because your enemy is within range for you to strike them with your weapon, for example. Since you attack them and your weapons don't have the power trait, what that basically means is that they are not revealed, which means that they become hidden once again, which means if your opponent wants to do return attacks, It's going to be very difficult for them to do so, because otherwise, unless they have these gear to actually help them find you in the first place, you can't really do much of anything. And this is what I was referring to with that Dune Fremen reference at the beginning of the video. You could literally just pop out literally out of the ground with the Sky Mantle, attack your opponent, and then retreat again. They will not be able to return attacks to you in most cases. So when you combine those abilities with the hidden trait with close combat attacks and shooting attacks, you do so with silent weapons, you do so in close combat without power traits, that hidden gang mechanic could absolutely murder your opponent and they won't be able to stop you or do anything in return. So with that being said, with the hidden condition being one of the things you could use for this gang, let's go and talk about some more exploits of an Ash Waste Nomad gang that you can use to help you dominate on the battlefield. So like we said before, that hidden condition with those rules as written, really powerful as well. So because of that, I like to think of the Ash Waste Nomads as ranged versions of the Corpse Grinder cult. A lot of people don't like Corpse Grinder cults because you have to take willpower tests in order to shoot them or engage them in close combat. Very challenging gang to actually put hard arm to. Think of the Ash Waste Nomads as kind of like that, but with longer ranges is basically what they are. Because with that hidden condition, your enemy's not going to be able to engage you at all with shooting for the most part until they're really right on you. But by the way, while that's happening, you on the other hand can see them pretty well, and you can cause them all kinds of pain too. So when you combine that hidden condition with gun shrouds to get that silent trait, and using the right weapon sights, things like infra sights for example, you have a really good powerful ability to use stealth and use ambushing to attacking your enemies. Now because the Ash Waste gang is kind of fragile, ambushing is key to winning a victory against your opponent. You have to take the initiative or otherwise make your enemy be on the back foot the entire time without reacting to you at all times, because that way you're moving around, you're causing the attacks, you're carrying the engagement, and you're setting the tone of the battle, which is going to be totally in your advantage, which is basically kind of like being like a raider, which is exactly what Ash Waste Nomads are. Now it is very difficult to do, I will grant you that, but if you can able to do it, it's going to be extremely rewarding for your gaming experience as well as for your victories in your campaigns. Now let's go ahead and talk about Ash Waste Nomads and the Aranthian succession. So as we mentioned before, Ash Waste Nomads do not have access to vehicles at this point. And while that may sound like a handicap for you as a player, it's actually an advantage. And the reason why is because, yes, you may not be able to get vehicles, but you can use that same amount of credits on mounted fighters, which you do have in the form of the Dustpack Hellamite. And at the same time, because at the same time that the Aranthian succession, not all of these scenarios actually take place in the Ash Wastes, that means that you can't really use vehicles or mounted fighters in your games in the Aranthian succession. They're not taking place in the Ash Waste. It also means you're not actually spending a lot of the capital in creating your gang on vehicles for the most part. You can use that instead for your fighters who don't have the mounted condition. That way they have better equipment, better weapons, they can pack everything they need to be successful in the game, and that's exactly how you want to do it. At the same time, when you use your Ash Waste Nomads, you basically want to use overwhelming firepower as well as really strong defense in order to help out your gang, okay? So your offense is going to be your long-range firepower. That's what's going to do most of the killing against your enemy. Now, while that's happening, when your enemy does eventually engage with you, you got to be able to defend yourself in a good way. And so having a really good defense, especially in close combat, is going to be very important for your gang as well. So that's something you got to keep in mind, and we'll talk about that with the equipment that you should give your gang as well. At the same time, the ability to control battlefield conditions is going to be extremely helpful for your gang as well. For scenarios that do take place in the Ash Waste Nomads, the Ash Waste, you can use your Stormcaller in order to control the battlefield conditions, which is going to make it really important for you to actually engage your enemy at distance, while your enemy can't do the same thing back to you. So that's going to be very important as well. At the same time, the pitchback condition is going to be your friend with this gang, especially if you play in the Underhive. Using photo goggles as well as infrared sights are going to be your best friends for this gang. A lot of gangs usually don't invest in that kind of equipment for their fighters, so because of that, it's going to put you in the advantage. So keep that in mind when you play the Ash Waste Nomads. And finally, there is a new Warrior Spirits game mechanic that has came out with the Necromunda Apocrypha scenarios that have been dropping from the Warhammer Communities page. There's a scenario called Halfway Dead where they introduce a brand new game mechanic called the Warrior Spirits. You can actually use that in your games in Necromunda. Now granted, it's also under the purview of your arbitrator whether they want to use it or not, but since it's a game mechanic that's free to download from the Warhammer Community page, I don't think very many our game arbitrators are going to be upset about using that. So that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the Warrior Spirits game mechanic next. Alright, so here we are back to my desktop again, and this is the halfway dead scenario from the Necromunda Apocrypha scenarios that are available from the Warhammer Communities page. Now let's go ahead and go straight directly towards what the Warrior Spirits rule is saying about. So let's talk about this. As a designer's commentary, Warrior Spirits, presented below are the rules for using Ash Waste Nomad Warrior Spirits, allowing you to recreate the events described in the Halfway Dead. Now if the arbitrator wishes, there are new rules may be used in their campaign. We have the Sungar Warrior Spirits. Warrior Spirits represent the esoteric beliefs and fighting styles of the Ash Waste Nomad chieftains, watchers, and whether or not these are actual supernatural creatures who aid the outland fighters in battle, or perhaps merely an aspect of their strange religion manifested through latent psychic abilities, is unknown, though their effectiveness in battle cannot be denied. Summoning the Spirits. There are 6 different warrior spirits that an Ash Waste Nomads gang can benefit from in an Ash Waste battle. In Step 7 of the pre-battle sequence, the Ash Waste Nomads player rolls a number of d6 equal to the number of watchers and chieftains they have in their crew. Compare the results of each dice to the warrior spirit table below to see which warrior spirits the gang has available for this battle. Note that multiples of the same spirit may be generated for each battle if duplicate results are rolled on any of the dice. So what that basically means is that you're going to actually have 3 of these warrior spirits that you can call upon in your game. That's assuming, of course, if you have a chieftain as well as 2 watchers, we'll be doing our list. So that's going to be very important to have to keep that in mind. Also, another thing you got to keep in mind too is that your warrior spirits are random. They are based on the mercies of a d6, so keep that in mind because it's going to be just an added bonus to your gang rather than a thing that you can rely upon all the time. Now it says using warrior spirits in battle. At the start of an Ash Waste Nomads chieftains or watchers activation, before they perform any actions, they may choose a benefit from a warrior spirit. Note that multiple warrior spirits cannot be invoked in the same activation. Choose one of the spirits generated for the battle, immediately apply its effect on the active fighter. Each warrior spirit can only be used once per battle. So let's go on and talk about the types you get. You have Steergar, the storm spirit. The fighter becomes one with the storm, appearing and vanishing with each rolling crowd front. If the visibility X rolls in effect, the fighter may be removed anywhere on the battlefield at least X inches away from any enemy fighters, where X is equal to the distance in the visibility rule. Their activation then ends. So basically, what that means they can go anywhere on the battlefield they want to. Within it, so most of the visibility rules are 24 inches. They can go anywhere on the battlefield within 24 inches, so long as they're 24 inches away from enemy fighters. So if you want to get those long-range shots on an exposed flank, for example, or from a heightened elevation, this is the thing for you. Then we have Dagar, the Kim spirit. Tar-like toxins ooze out of the ground all around the fighter, causing the surface to become sticky and foul. It's greedy ash eating through armor and flesh. Place the 5-inch blast template marker centered on the fighter. Until this fighter's end phase, all enemy fighters treat the blast marker as dangerous terrain. So another really cool way for you to protect some of your fighters that are actually being attacked. Let's say they're being engaged in close combat and you want to protect one of your watchers. You could use this in order to do so, and this could be a really nice way to keep your enemy away from you for a turn, buying you enough time to do something else in exchange. Then we have Tygar, the Ash Spirit. Ashen winds roll around the fighter, choking and blinding their foes and making it all but impossible to find them to land a decisive blow upon their adversary. All enemy fighters in 3 inches of the fighter must pass an initiative test or become subject to the blind condition. So once again, stopping your enemies from actually attacking you. That's a very powerful ability, and if you end up rolling this, you can use it to protect your watchers or your chieftain or wherever the situation may be. Then we have Chargar, the Electro Spirit. Coruscating electricity surrounds the fighter as if static from the storms were drawn to them, which they direct in their weapon attacks. For the duration of the fighter's activation, all attacks made by this fighter gain the shock trait. If they are using a weapon that already has a shock trait, then it's triggerable on any successful hit roll rather than just a 6. This is going to be a huge ability. It's going to help you out. Like I said earlier, almost every single ranged attack that an Ash Waste Nomad gang has access to has the shock ability, which means that it automatically wounds if you hit, getting this ability off. As you can imagine, it can cause a lot of damage to some really high toughness vehicles if you manage to get this warrior spirit to help you out. Then we have Vogar, the Fire Spirit. The fighter harnesses the Torment Fire Spirit Necromunda, channeling its rage into frenzied attacks. Choose a friendly fighter within 12 inches. This may be the active fighter. For the duration of that fighter's next activation, or the current activation the fighter chose themselves, add 2 to their characteristic and 1 to any weapon skill rolls they make. So another really powerful close combat ability. Let's say you're being charged against, or you need to make a charge against an enemy. Having those 2 additional attacks with this, and combined with the additional attack you get from charge, gives that fighter 3 extra attacks, and regardless of what they're armed with, it's really going to harm your opponent as well. Plus having that +1 to hit with your weapon skill, invaluable for close combat. And then finally we have Mirgar, the Blade Spirit. It says this fighter's blades become keener, their razor sharp edges carving through armor, flesh and bone with equal ease. For the duration of their activation, any attacks made by the fighter using a weapon with a melee or versatile trait change their AP to -3 unless their AP would be higher and increase their damage by 1. So, needless to say, the ability to take away your enemy's armor save and adding 1 additional damage to close combat attacks is invaluable no matter what kind of attack you are making. You pair this with, for example, with something like a chain lance for one of your champions, for example, or your chieftain. That's just going to make it be able for them to cut right through armor and inflict even more damage, or even their armor with a long blade, which is basically just a sword that gives them melee. It's going to give them a really powerful ability to protect themselves in close combat as well. So like I said before, this warrior spirits game mechanic, it is kind of random because you can't really choose what warrior spirit you get, but every little bit will definitely help out an Ash Waste Nomad game because of all the handicaps they're facing. So any one of these could be perfect for your scenario and your gang. So now that we're done talking about the new Warrior Spirits game mechanic, let's talk about Hanger-Ons, Brutes, and Hired Guns. Now, another handicap the Ash Waste Nomads actually face is the limit on the type of hired guns, Hanger-Ons, and Brutes they can recruit for their gang. For example, ammo jacks, road dogs, and sloppers are the only hired guns you can actually add to your gang from the original rulebook. So you can't hire bounty hunters or hive scum, for example, which can be very limiting for your gang on the things that they can't do. Now, obviously, out of ammo jacks, road dogs, and sloppers, the rogue dog is the most important one for obvious reasons. Being able to save your fighters to get those critical injuries could be extremely helpful for you. Now, with that being said, though, there are some opportunities for your gang to actually be quite powerful with their Brutes and Hanger-Ons, and this actually takes the form of the Arthurmite Herder as well as the Arthurmite Dune Scuttler. So let's talk about the Arthurmite Herder. Now, they cost 40 credits and they're available only to your gang. They have movement inheritance of 5, 3+ movement weapon skill, 4+ ballistic skill, 3 strength and toughness, 1 wound, 4 initiative, 1 attack, 7 leadership, 5 cool, 6 willpower, and 7 intelligence. They do come with a pole arm, mesh armor, and an ash cloak, and they do have the Born to the Waste skill. Now, obviously, nothing much great about these guys. You're probably not going to use them too much to be successful in combat. But the reason why you take on these Hanger-Ons is because the bonuses they give to your Arthurmite Dune Scullers. You have the Arthurmite Whisperer rule, and it says during the post-battle sequence, an Arthurmite Herder may tend to the wounds of an Arthurmite Dune Sculler. If the Arthurmite Dune Sculler is critically injured, it goes in recovery. Otherwise, roll a d6. On a 3+, the Arthurmite Dune Sculler heals any lasting injuries it has and goes in recovery. This cannot be performed in the same post-battle sequence as a training program ability, which means that, of course, that you can get rid of lasting injuries, you can get rid of critically injuries, and you just basically just miss a game, and you can bring your Dune Sculler right back again. Very powerful ability because a Dune Sculler is quite expensive in terms of credits. Now, we also have the training program ability. It says during this post-battle sequence, a Nomad Arthurmite Herder may attempt to train an Arthurmite Dune Sculler. Make an intelligence test for the Arthurmite Dune Herder, which is an intelligence score of 7+. If successful, the Arthurmite Dune Sculler earns D3 experience points. This cannot be performed in the same post-battle sequence as the Arthurmite Whisperer ability. So that's going to help your Arthurmite Dune Scullers to become more powerful and to level up more quickly and cause more problems for enemies down the line. And you're allowed 2 of these in your gang, so I highly recommend that you actually maximize that and at the same time maximize your Brute as well. Now, your Brute for this game takes the form of the Arthurmite Dune Scuttler. They cost 210 credits apiece. You're allowed to have 2 of them in your gang. Now, their stats are 6-inch movement, 3+ weapon skill, 5+ ballistic skill, 5 strength and toughness, 3 wounds, 3 initiative, 4 attacks, 7 leadership, 8 cool, 8 willpower, and 8 intelligence. They are armed with mandibles, are extremely powerful, as well as equipped with heavy carapace armor, so they have really good armor ability. Their wall scuttler ability is when an Arthurmite Dune Scuttler climbs, the vertical distance moved is not halved. In other words, they can always count as climbing up or down a ladder. And they have the hard to kill special rules. Arthurmite Dune Scullers are notoriously hard to kill. When rolling on the lasting injury table for an Arthurmite Dune Sculler, roll twice and apply whichever result the controlling player wishes. So, once again, it can be really helpful to keep these guys alive. They also come with the Fearsome skill, which means your opponents will need to take willpower tests in order to engage these guys in close combat. And they have the Nerves of Steel skill, which means if they get pinned, all they gotta do is pass a cool test to escape. Now, granted, their cool level is only 8+, but that's not so bad because if you pair with an Arthurmite Herder, what they can do is they can actually level you up your player with more experience points, so that way you can lower that cool stat and make it even more powerful as time goes on. Now, when it comes to the weapons that the Mandible actually has for this creature for close combat attacks, it basically has battle strength value of 5, -1 AP, 2 damage. You also have the melee as well as the rending skills, so that part is kind of good for that. But obviously, pairing up these Dune Scuttlers with your Arthurmite Herders are going to help these guys level up, also recover better from more serious injuries. It's a win-win, so you should always maximize this for your gang whenever possible. Alright, so now that we're done talking about your brutes, hanger-ons, hire guns, let's go ahead and talk about your starting roster. So, this is the Ash Waste Nomads starting roster, ready at 2,395 credits. You'll have 5 credits left over. So let's talk about the gang's composition. First off, you have a chieftain. It's going to cost you 120 credits, 185 credits in total. They have an ash cloak and sky mantle. They also have a mesh armor for 15 credits, a blast pistol, a long blade for defensive attacks, as well as a rocket pack with the overseer ability. The rocket pack is to support your fighters or armor charge casters, the long blade ability, so that way they can fight defensively in close combat, with parry to help keep your fighter alive a little more in close combat. After that, your first watch is going to cost you 355 credits. They automatically come with ash cloak as well as a sky mantle. They have mesh armor for 15 credits. You equip them with a charge caster with shock blast and crack rockets for 155, as well as a long blade and a blast pistol. The blast pistol makes a good secondary weapon in case anything should happen to the charge caster. The long blade can also be used in melee to be offensive and pair with the blast pistol. At the same time, also protect you well in close combat with the parry ability. You have photo goggles, and the reason why is so that way you can make those longer range attacks even with pitch black conditions, and a rocket pack as well, so that way you can automatically reload your charge caster in case you fail an armor roll. Now you're gonna have Eyes of the Wasteland, because what that's going to do is going to increase your visibility by 6 inches. So if you combine that with your photo goggles, for example, you're going to have an 18-inch range to be able to target enemies in a pitch black condition type situation. So that's going to be extremely valuable for your gang. Now, Watcher number 2 is going to cost you 285 credits. This fighter is going to have an ash cloak as well as a sky mantle. They're going to have mesh armor as well as a web gun for the template attack weapon, as well as a blast pistol and a long blade for close combat attacks and backup weapons. And they're going to have the hip shooting ability, so that way they can do the running gun special ability, which is a double action, which means you can move twice and then open fire with your weapon, which is perfect. Now you do take a penalty for your ballista skill when you do that, but since you're armed with a web gun, which is a template weapon, whatever ends up being under the template is going to be automatically captured. The web gun's a powerful ability at strength 5. It can also put enemy fighters out of action very quickly, and it's going to pair perfectly with when you do it with your assault fire team. We'll talk about some of the fighters in that roster here in a second. Now then, continuing out the rest of the roster, we're going to have a third champion in this gang, and the reason why we're able to do that is because in Aranthian succession, we double the number of champions we can have in a gang. You're going to have our Stormcaller, and the Stormcaller is going to cost you 185 credits. They automatically come with the Ash Cloak and a Dustspike Hellamite, but you'd equip them with mesh armor, give them the Stormcaller staff so that way they can use it to use their abilities, as well as a blast pistol for self-defense. And the skill you're going to give them is Beast Handler, so that way you get additional attack in close combat using their Dustspike Hellamite to do an attack. Now your Stormcaller, of course, is bare bones, and the reason why is because you are not moving your Stormcaller at all. For them to be able to use the ability to call the storm is a double action, which means they'll have to commit their entire turn in order to use that ability, unless of course you use the leader's overseer ability on this guy, which means that you're never going to move this guy to do anything. So put this person far away in a quiet corner where your enemy can't attack him, and just have them call the storm the entire time while they're on the battlefield. Now, out of that, you're going to have 2 Dust Riders. They're both equipped exactly the same at 210 credits, Dust Rider number 1 and 2. Both will have Ash Cloaks as well as Dustspike Hellamites for their mounted conditions. They'll both have Mesh Armor. They'll both have Chain Lances, so that way they have brutal close combat attack. They will both come with Blast Carbines, so that way they can do medium to close range shooting. And they'll also be armed with Photo Goggles, so that way they have that 12-inch view in pitch black type conditions. That's going to be important because you really can't charge anything you can't see, so having those Photo Goggles is so that way you can get those charges off and use those Chain Lances with their mounted condition to full effect and just curb stop enemies as you go up against them. After that, you'll have a Warrior. Ash Warrior Nomad number 1 is going to be costing you 315 credits. This fighter's got an Ash Cloak as well as a Sky Mantle. They have Mesh Armor for the armor protection, and they're going to be armed with a Charge Caster with Shock Blast as well as Crack Rockets. So that guy's going to be armed with a heavy weapon. This guy's also going to be armed with a blast pistol for a backup weapon with a long blade for defensive melee. You give them the Photo Goggles as well, so that way they can fire in pitchback conditions, as well as a rocket pack, so they automatically pass their first failed reroll for ammo checks. And this is your gang specialist as well. You're going to pair this up with either your champ, and you're going to pair this up with your leader. So that way your leader can use your overseer ability on Warrior number 1 to get those double shots with a charge caster at enemy targets. And so that's exactly what you're going to use for this guy in order to get that taken care of. After that, you have 2 more Warriors, Warriors number 2 and 3. Both of those guys were going to be equipped exactly the same at 180 credits apiece. Both have Ash Cloaks as well as Sky Mantles. Both have Mesh Armor as well as long rifles equipped with infrared sights. Both have Blast Pistols for backup weapons and long blades for defensive melee. And both of them have rocket packs as well, so that way they can assist the fighters who are equipped with the Charge Casters. Now, these 2 warriors, their job is exactly the same thing. They're going to be paired up with the fighters in your gang who are equipped with the Charge Casters. And the reason why is because if they're within range, they can use those rocket packs to automatically reload those weapons and pass those ammo checks, so that way those charge casters can cause as much damage as possible towards your enemies. And then, of course, you're going to have 2 Dust Runners, Dust Runner number 1 and 2. Both are equipped exactly the same at 120 credits apiece. Both will have mesh armor. Both will have blast carbines and blast pistols for backup weapons. The blast carbines will be used for their short range ability, give you +2 to hit modifier to make up for the Dust Runner's horrible ballistic skill. And the blast weapon's a good close combat support weapon as well as a backup weapon, and long blades as well to defend them in close combat as well. Now, the reason why we equipped all these guys with long blades is because the long blade does have the parry ability, which is going to give you better defense in close combat. And at the same time, you have 2 weapons to do counterattacks with if you want to as well, so that way all the gang members in this gang is completely covered. And then lastly, you're going to have a rogue doc, which is going to be your hanger-on for the gang, so that way you can patch up your fighters in case they suffer critical injuries. So here is the gang overview for your roster. You're going to basically have 4 fire teams on this one. You have support fire team number 1, which will consist of your chieftain as well as warrior number 1 and 3. Your support fire team number 2 will consist of watcher number 1 and warrior number 2. And then of course you have a third support fire team, which will be your stormcaller. Your assault fire team number 1 will be your dust rider number 1 and your dust rider number 2, and your assault fire team number 2 will consist of watcher number 2, dune runner number 1, as well as dune runner number 2. And we'll talk about exactly how that happens with the gang overview. Now for this gang, as you develop over the course of the campaign, my recommendation is the very first purchase you should make for all your fighters are gun shrouds. You're going to want that for all your fighters who are equipped with long rifles, and that word should be and blast carbines. And the reason why is that way your opponents can't find you when you're shooting at them at longer ranges with those gun shrouds. That's going to really help you to maintain that hitting condition and cause all kinds of havoc for your enemy. Afterwards, the next part you want to do is hire your Athermite Herders as well as your Athermite Dune Scalers. Buy both sets and 2. So buy your maximum amount of herders and your maximum amount of dune scalers. And the reason why that is the case is because most of the scenarios in an Aranthian succession do not take place in the Ash Waste. So if it should happen that you'll be fighting in the Underhive instead of the Ash Waste, instead of having your mounted fighters, which is your Stormcaller as well as your 2 Dust Runners, you'll just replace them instead with your Dune Scuttlers, and they will actually take the place of your mounted fighters who can't participate as a fire assault team if there should be games in the Underhive. And if you're taking place in the Ash Waste, that gives you another assault fire team that you can use to dominate your opponent. So now that we're done talking about the rosters, let's go ahead and talk about your gang and how you're going to use it on the tabletop in the gang overview. Alright, so let's go and talk about how you're going to be using this gang specifically on the tabletop. So here's a little strip map of what your enemy look like. Now, your enemy that are smart, they'll actually have 2 fire teams of some sort at least in their main deployment area, and this is how you're going to pretty much deploy your gang as well. You're going to have your 2 support fire teams in the center, flanked either side by assault fire teams, and then your support fire team number 3, which is your Stonecaller, is going to be in a far corner somewhere where they can't be attacked too easily, where they can easily be protected. So that way they're spamming their Call the Storm ability and lowering the visibility for your enemy. Now what's going to happen is this. You're going to use your fire support team number 1, which consists of your chieftain as well as warrior number 1 as well as warrior number 3. Your chieftain is going to spam the overseer ability on warrior number 1, who's the specialist arm of the charge caster. What those guys are going to do is they're going to fire twice with their charge caster, firing shock attacks as well as crack attacks at enemy vehicles, enemy high value targets, as well as enemy fighters as well. Warrior number 3 acts as the security for this team, because what this warrior actually ends up doing is that they actually start sniping at targets using the infrared sights on their gun, on their long rifle, and taking out targets that way as well, and are also protecting the charge casters are doing it. Now, because these warriors all have rocket packs, if the charge casters run out of ammo, they can reload automatically up to 2 times, and they'll be perfectly fine. Now, fire support number 2 does exactly the same thing. The champion in that fire support, watcher number 1, concentrates fire with their charge casters at your opponent as well. Warrior number 2, of course, does long range shooting with the long rifle with the infrared sight to keep your enemy pinned down. And if anything should happen to archer number 1, they run out of ammunition for the charge caster. Both these fighters do have their rocket packs, so they can be taken care of. Now, while all this is happening, of course, like I said before, we end up having the Stormcaller calling in the storm and lowering your enemy's visibility, so that way they can't really attack your characters. What this is going to do is going to protect your 2 assault fire teams. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So assault fire team number 1 is going to be your Dust Runners. Dust Runner number 1 and 2. Since they have a faster movement allowance, what you're going to do is have these guys attack from a far flank if not all the way behind your opponent as well. They're primarily maneuvering in order to attack your enemy from this direction, and once they're able to do so, they'll charge directly into an exposed enemy flank, charge forward with their chain lances, take out your opponents in close combat. At the same time, you can also use these chain lances to target your enemy vehicles as well. And I forgot to mention this, since everyone's armed with shock weapons, you can also use this to target your enemy vehicles and hopefully win through it and get penetrating or non-glancing blows and just destroy enemy vehicles that way. Now, Fire Team number 2 is going to be led by Watcher number 2 as well as Dust Runner number 1 and 2. Dust number 1 and 2 are armed with blast carbines, so that way they'll be getting bonuses when they get closer in combat and also putting out rapid fire. And Watcher number 2 does have their gun and run ability from hip shooting, so that way they can engage the enemy quickly. So what you'll do is you do exactly the same thing. You'll take these guys, and instead of going all the way around like you're going to do with your Assault Fire Team number 1, you can just send them directly straight forward. You don't have to really try to outflank an enemy from the rear or anything like that. And the reason why is because they just don't have the movement to do so. And then from there, of course, you can engage your enemy by opening fire with your weapons directly into your opponent and actually just setting them up and just blasting them with that web gun, webbing enemy down. If they're getting down, your Dust Runners can run up to them and finish them off in coup de grace, earning them experience points and also increasing them. Those guys can also open fire with their blast carbines and cause all kinds of problems. And this is exactly how you would go about using your Ash Waste Nomad gangs on the battlefield, alright? And then you'll be using the hidden condition for your support guys, so that way they don't get shot at, and then you can move in and destroy. And that's how you're going to destroy your enemies with ambushing attacks. So in conclusion, upgrading your gang to an Aranthian Succession campaign is a great way to fully equip your gang with powerful weapons, war gear, as well as vehicles. With new vehicles dropping all the time, this could be a really fun way to equip the gang of your gang of your dreams and bring them out into whatever situation you want to run into. Now, I wouldn't stress about doubling the size of your gang. Like I said before, the reason why is because a lot of the scenario rules that you actually see that are out there still limits the number of fighters you can take. So don't worry about doubling the size of your gang. Rather, take the gang that you have and really concentrate the equipment that they take with them, so that way they can really survive whatever goes their way. Remember, in Aranthian Succession, quality reigns over quantity with your gang builds, so always keep that in mind. And as always, I will be dropping new videos on this topic for the Aranthian Succession with other gangs to help you out on your Necromunda journey. So that's good for this one, you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this one, you guys. I will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.